Well, tell me, mama, what's going on? Tell me, darling, what's going on? I'm going back.
Welcome back, everybody. Bacon and Egg Show, episode 19, August 29th, 2020. We got Mike joining us again today, our Longhorn Insider. Glad to have him back. Can look forward to next week's show as well, which is going to be our big Longhorn preview. So we're going to have Mike around with us today and also on the Longhorn preview show. But glad to have him back. Good to see you, Mike. And Jay, what's going on?
A lot, man. Kind of a crazy week. You know, we were originally planning on doing the Longhorn preview show this week with Mike, and this has been one of the most unprecedented weeks in the history of sports, in the history of our country, period. So we sort of decided to shift gears, and either way, we wanted to have Mike on to talk about everything that's happening. So, Mike, how you doing today, man?
Hey guys, thanks for having me on again. Yeah, just another crazy week. Monumental, like historical, whatever the term you want to use, moments are happening right before our eyes with all these sports, the protests and everything. Sad to hear about, another shooting. So just, yeah, a lot going on. So emotions all over the place, especially being, half African American. It's just, you hate to see this stuff again, but it's bringing up the conversation because, these things have probably been happening without video for, quite some time now, police brutality. So, the only way to get over all this is to have conversations about it. So I think that's kind of what a lot of the sports organizations are trying to achieve. And so, we'll kind of see where this all goes here. So.
Yeah, well, let's start. I guess let's just start right from where this latest sort of uprising of civil unrest started from. So Jacob Blake was shot 7 times in the back by a Kenosha, Wisconsin police officer on August 23rd. So Kenosha is 35 miles from the Bucs training facility. That was something where, okay, if you're from Milwaukee, like the players basically felt, a couple of them said, like, we wish we wouldn't have been in Orlando because we would have wanted to be in Milwaukee to be out on the front of this. But anyways, it comes to the Bucs and the Magic playing playoff game. The Magic are out on the floor. The Bucs never show up. Magic leave the floor with 4 minutes left until tip-off, and that's it. They didn't play. The Bucs sat out in protest. It's a strike. For me, it's a strike. I mean, it is a protest. It is a form of protest, but this was a player strike to speak out against everything that had just happened and the repeated happenings that in our country. So, guys, let's just go from there. I mean, that's sort of what started this whole landslide of player strikes and protests and demonstrations this week. So, Kerry, just starting from, with that being the starting point, sort of, what stood out to you? What's been going on in your eyes?
To me, this was totally different circumstances, but if we remember at the beginning of the COVID, the pandemic here domestically, we had NBA games getting canceled right before tip with players getting, positive test, and just how quickly, March Madness, how quick everything shut down. It was one of those nights where you were just glued to the news or social media, whatever, just to see what the next thing was, the next shoe that was going to drop. And that's kind of how this felt the other night. You mentioned the Bucks and the Magic game, and then within half an hour of that, Rockets in Oklahoma City discussing their, decision not to play. And I just want to, Jay, I'm glad you mentioned calling it a strike, because the term boycott has been used a lot this past week, and I don't agree with that term in this circumstance, because that suggests that, like, the players are consumers or something, like they're just choosing not to play kind of thing out of, like, I think it's a strike, like so I don't know. And just a little side note there, but no. So this whole thing just happened so quickly, and then we hear about the Milwaukee Brewers and the Cincinnati Reds deciding to strike for their game. You hear about the Seattle Mariners, who have the most black players on one team in Major League Baseball, opting out. I think it was against the Padres that also supported the decision there, and they called their game off. The one thing that stood out to me, I guess, that night was that the NHL didn't immediately. There were 2 playoff games that night. One was already underway whenever the Bucks decision and everything came down. And in fact, members of the Flyers and the Islanders said that if they would have known pre-game kind of how things are going to play out, they would have, probably opted not to play. The Stars and Avalanche still played that night. But the response from the NHL after that, I thought was pretty impressive, in terms of someone that's been around the sport as long as I have, to see the kind of response from the NHL, which is a heavily majority white sport and league, to have all the Western Conference kind of players get there behind Ryan Reeves at the podium. Ryan Reeves, black player for the Vegas Golden Knights, and basically have this kind of big coordinated message that said, like, this is bigger than playoff hockey right now. It was pretty impressive, and it made me happy to see that kind of message coming from hockey. It made me proud to see the sport kind of taking a stand on these things, which honestly, for so long, the sport just kind of brushed aside. And as you guys mentioned before, this is bringing the conversation out. The NHL playoffs are going to return, I think, tonight. They've had a couple days off of, reflection and kind of making this a conversation, but it's made it a conversation. It's got people in the hockey world, which otherwise may not have even cared a single bit about what happened in Minneapolis or Kenosha or anywhere all over the country or the world where these things have been happening. Well, now the conversation's right in their living room, and they have to address it somehow. And I think that's the biggest thing that stood out for me.
Mike.
Yeah. The first thing I want to say is I'm just tired of this. It just seems so normalized, almost like school shootings. It's just so normalized, and I'm just sick of it. I wish we could just move forward. But that's life right now. And I think having these conversations is the best thing that can happen. And so I hate when I hear they're saying these multi-million-dollar players do this and that. And you have to think Sterling Brown is on the Milwaukee Bucks, and there was a video not too long ago with him in an altercation with a police officer. So people forget that a lot of these guys grew up witnessing things and experiencing things. So to brush aside just because they made it and, might financially have means to where they're no longer looked in that capacity because of money. I just think it's super unfair. The second point is, I think I was talking to Jay earlier this week about, we were having a conversation about how it'd be more important for the MLB and predominantly white sports to take a stand or have a statement on something. And I think it's gotten better with MLB kind of following the lead, NHL as well. But it also bothers me, and maybe just through my eyes, is that the NHL didn't really respond until after Evander Kane came out and was like, why isn't the NHL, like, we got to do better? And it's only then that the response should happen. And I think if we're trying to move forward on something like this, it doesn't need to be in reaction to, oh, we got to do this to save face. It should be the reaction because it's of something that's not right and that there's injustices that are going on right now. So while I think it's a step forward, you still saw a couple of Major League Baseball games getting played. So to me, seeing it through my eyes, it's progress, but there's still a long way to go. And Jack Flaherty from the Cardinals, put out an emotional post, and I forget what the exact saying is, but it's, when the only change only happens when the majority is just as outraged as the minority is. And that's really what it's going to come down to. So for me, it's like, I hate to see these tragedies every day. I worry about getting stopped by the police every day. Like not that I think that that something like that could happen, but you never know what could happen, because there are some great cops that are out there. My brother's a cop, and seeing some of these things that are happening to 98%, 99% of the cops that do great things, and you don't hear the great stories that they they take care of people every day, and just don't get recognized for all the great things. And you see one or two bad incidents, and it just becomes all cops are bad. But there is a problem, and I think it's systemic, and it comes with training, and that's a whole other topic. But for me with sports, it's like it's a voice, like, and a lot of people are upset right now because you have sports is almost like a getaway. Well, it's like, why do we want to get away from situations that are happening? We need to face the situation. So when sports is putting it right back in your face, it's like, hey, why don't we just deal with it? So those are kind of a few thoughts that I have on everything.
Yeah, no, I you made some great points, and I know Kerry and I definitely appreciate your point of view, and that's aside from your knowledge and your insight on so many things, just your perspective is equally important to us. When you talk about the people that maybe you see it a lot on Twitter or social media or in the media, where people are just like, that's not what sports are for. That's not, just there's still this shut up and dribble crowd, or and I don't really understand. If it makes you that uncomfortable to have this conversation, that should be an indication to you that maybe you're a part of this problem. If it's supposed to make you uncomfortable. This is not some conversation that, as a society, we should have to have, but there's obviously reason to have it, because people don't understand that. Mike, I don't think you were wrong at all to bring up the systemic issues in our society and in the police force. Like, that's a big part of this. That's a part of this conversation. I mean, when the players are sitting there, and the NBA took the lead on this, so they're the ones that are going to reignite it. And I think they want to play. The Lakers and the Clippers both voted at one point to say, you know what, we're willing to walk away from all of this right now. Like, we will do that. And the rest of the teams didn't vote that way, but two of them did. And it's two of the top three teams probably in the NBA that said that they will be willing to walk away from this at this point. Apparently, President Obama consulted LeBron, Chris Paul, who's the head of the Players Association, some other key players. President Obama encouraged them to restart the season, or to restart the playoffs, but it helped advise them on some things too. And then this was the list of things that the players, sort of the demands, I guess, if you will, in order for them to start again. So the NBA established a social justice coalition that includes players, coaches, and governors, which is what the NBA calls owners now. It's now called the governors. That all includes increasing access to voting, which we'll bring up again later, promoting civic engagement, and advocating for meaningful police and criminal justice reform. Secondly, working with local election officials to use NBA arenas for voting, which I know has already been a key in some, you hear Atlanta has been already mentioned that. There's been some big cities that have already said they were going to do that.
In fact, I saw the American Airlines Center in Dallas has been confirmed, as well as Toyota Center in Houston. I haven't seen anything about the arena in San Antonio being confirmed quite yet, but those two have already been confirmed. They're going to be fully open for voting locations. So.
There seems to be some deadlines that may have passed in terms of doing like polling location. So they're in response to that, they would make it a place where you could go register to vote, or a place to drop off your mail-in ballots or things like that. So.
Just to kind of cut in, if you don't mind.
Go ahead. Nope, go ahead.
It's like, isn't that kind of crazy that we think that voting is what's going to change this? You know what I mean? Like, that's kind of sad when you like
look at it
that way. I don't know. Like, that just seems like a real sad. Like, that's where we're at. It's like voting. Like, the politicization of all this is just like crazy, and it's not helping, and it starts from the top. And yeah, do I think that leadership, obviously from the very, very top, is crucial. I definitely think it is. But then you look at Adam Silver, and he's done a lot of great things. But I think when calling it a postponement instead of, kind of what it is, it's just it's just like these subtle things that happen and that I see sometimes in my lifetime that are just like, man, like that was just so subtle, but that is like the issue is in the subtleties of these things. And it may not seem like the most racist thing or or something that's inappropriate, but you're like, man, I was watching Mighty Ducks the other day on Disney Plus. I was like, man, it's a great movie. I literally watched it, and they called Emilio Estevez called there's two black kids and one white kid. He called it the Oreo line, like
Oh
as a
yeah,
line shit.
I
Like,
forgot about that.
I was like, did that just happen? Like, I like blew me away. I was like, okay, like this is this is a movie that I love, and like I just didn't really know how to feel about that. I was just like, man, like this is kind of crazy, and it's just a subtlety thing. Like I never noticed that until, but that's kind of what I want to see is people just acknowledging the smaller issues that turn into bigger issues. So
Well, King Kerry, that's sort of it's built into our society. That's what systemic racism is.
Exactly.
Like,
Yeah.
it's built into our everyday lingo, the way that we think, because we see it through our media. Like it's almost like you said, Mike, where with the way that it's also subtle. It's almost like so many of us throughout our lives have been programmed to think that something like that is cool. It's okay to say that.
Yeah.
And it's just it's normalized.
Yeah.
And that kind of goes to Mike. I'm glad you brought that up about the term postponement when this all was going on, because saying that it's okay, well, the NBA games or MLB or whatever are just postponed. Well, that just suggests that like they're going to come right back. It's just delayed. It doesn't leave, that language doesn't leave the possibility for these teams to come back and say, no, these games are not going to come back. Like it kind of eliminates that idea, and kind of like what I was mentioning with like the boycott thing. To boycott something's kind of a luxury. You can like choose to like not purchase a product or choose, something, where it's strike is we have demands. We have, we're trying to present this in a way, we're not going to come back to work until things are fixed thing. And I just think that language just really suggests, like we talk about the millionaire athletes and those kinds of things, it kind of plays to that, right? Like, oh, it's just postponed, they'll be back this weekend so you can enjoy your basketball or enjoy your baseball. And it's a boycott, it's not a strike. And I think that plays exactly into that perception of the spoiled athlete kind of thing, but also just I think you're absolutely correct on these the way that the language is used is really important.
Yeah, and if you thought this was big, wait till the NFL.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and for me, it's like when I see so much, it's like, if I couldn't do that at my job, no, you couldn't, because you're not as powerful as those athletes are. And does that piss you off? Probably a little bit. Like you see these guys and they're rich, they're famous. And now people are understanding how much power they have, and it pisses them off. And it's like, what do you mean you couldn't walk? No, you couldn't walk off your job because you're not as powerful as they are. They have this ability right now to protest at their jobs, to decide, you know what, screw you, I'm not going to work today. So no, it's not the same. It's not comparable to me deciding not to go to work on Monday, or for me to protest in a way about something that my employer says that I can't do. It's not even remotely comparable. Like that, I've never understood that argument. They're not
join a union.
Yeah, like that. I never understood that. It makes no sense to me.
I think them using this platform is going to be huge, because think of us when we were kids. We all had our favorite athletes, right? Like you think about it and you're like, man, if some of my favorite athletes like Paul Pierce, Michael Jordan, like if those guys say something as a child, it's not your father or your mother, it's someone that you're idolized. So you do take that into account. And so been watching a lot of movies, obviously, during the pandemic right now. And I was watching 42 the other day, so rest in peace, Chadwick Boseman. And there's some great scenes in there where the father is yelling at, Jackie Robinson, the son's yelling at him too because the father's doing it. And then you see Pee Wee Reese in that scene, put his arm over his shoulder, and they pan back to the kid, and it's like he sees his like idol on the baseball field doing something different, and it creates like this, thought that, hey, maybe that isn't the right thing to do. So these athletes, that's why people wanted Jordan to be a little more outspoken and things like that. And it seems like he kind of is a liaison right now between the players and the coaches in the NBA, and maybe becoming that figure now as an owner that he wasn't really as a player. And so, these guys, they care about their communities, and they grew up in some of these communities. So them saying something might not make the biggest change in the world, but even if it changes one or two young minds' mindsets, that's just a way to move forward with this whole thing. So another opinion.
Well, this brings me to a question I wanted to ask you guys about kind of where this goes from here. Jay, you were mentioning the kind of list of demands, or if you want to call it that, of what the NBA players were looking for in terms of, okay, if we're going to return to play, this is kind of what we're asking for. In you guys' mind, would these sports just not coming back at all, just saying we're striking, we're not going to come back and play the rest of the playoffs, we're done, would that have more of a profound effect on the discussion, the national conversation, whatever you want to call it, versus coming back to play again this weekend? Like, does it seem it is one of those more powerful or has a bigger effect or a detrimental effect than the other?
Jay?
Mike, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I think it would be shocking because the amount of like the financial hit and all that stuff, like you're talking about TV deals, and man, like that would be the ultimate statement. I don't know if it would ever get to that point, but I think that would be a huge message. But I just don't know if that's realistic. Just due to the players, they gave up a lot, man. They haven't seen their families in forever in the NBA. They're going through all this stuff. They're so close to the end of the season. There's, obviously financial things that are involved in it. And, but yeah, if you're taking all that stuff and you're basically saying, I'm willing to give this up, that would be big.
What a big sacrifice that would be, though. I know at this point in the playoffs, it's not like they're giving up their normal game salary checks, but they're still giving up money. They're still giving up exposure. They're still giving up time in their careers to play on the floors. That would be, and not just in the NBA. If we're talking across all sports, like that'd be a lot of guys giving up on some money that they work very, very hard to be able to earn. Would it be like the ultimate statement? Sure. But Mike, like you said, I don't anticipate it getting to that point where they're just like, you know what, we're not going to play for a month or a year or whatever. I don't know that it'll get there, but it would be the ultimate statement, Kerry, in my opinion. But they are the last thing, Kerry, real quick, that the players sort of asked for, demand, whatever you want to call it, was more advertising spots in each game, each televised game, dedicated to promoting greater civic engagement, and then also contributing to raising awareness around voter access and opportunity. Mike, you talked earlier about how the fact that voting that is considered a way to sort of vote this out, and in a way it's like voting out the voice of maybe voting someone into office that would be a voice of reason as opposed to a voice of division that we currently have in the presidency at this moment. But I think that's important. Like you said, Mike touched on earlier, the top down, at least having that voice coming from the top and sort of not lighting every fire humanly possible, and trying to create that sort of environment in our country that it doesn't have to be so divisive. Like we should love each other. That Black Lives Matter. Like being able to say those things out loud,
right?
Which the current administration will not do. That's that to me is why these voting things are so important. Voting just in general is such an important thing for people to do to be represented, and I'm personally glad that this is being made, such a point of this is being made right now, especially with the news that we've been hearing about the post office and things like that. So anyways, I sort of wanted to touch on that before.
Yeah, I mean, a quick point on that, though, as a kind of a reaction to that, is that, I mean, if we got new leadership from the top, that leadership has to come through with continuing this and not just be a stopgap and it's like, okay, everything's good again. Like, that's it. We just needed to vote. That's not good enough anymore. It needs to go further than that. And that's why I think these athletes can make real positive change with. It all starts with education. It all starts with, open-mindedness. And so when you get that from the top, I think that's going to help. But at the same time, there's kind of a fear that if it is just a stopgap, then who knows what could happen in 10 years? Like, is there really going to be progress, or is it just going to be stopped, make a little bit of progress, and then we still have a long way to go? So
and there's also the local factor to it. Showing up this November to vote in a presidential election is great, and obviously everybody needs to do it. We don't need to discuss all the particulars that have been hammered out over however long now about why, but what do you do in 2 years when the governor of Texas is up for re-election? What kind of, are you going to show up to the polls on in a midterm year to vote for your local representatives, vote for state senate, vote for all those things, vote in your city elections and determine who's on city council and who your mayor is? We talk about in Austin, like the police budget, modifications and stuff that the city council put through. Those things have such a greater effect on our day-to-day lives than, obviously the president of the United States is a big deal and has an effect on all of our lives, but if people don't turn out and vote for those local things and pay attention to the local politics, and ultimately what happens at the national level doesn't even really matter if you're not taking care of your own home first. And but I completely agree. Like, you can vote, you can put all the right people in, but if there's not a societal mentality shift amongst the people that aren't politicians, your everyday, day-to-day people, then what's it for, kind of thing? If we're still talking about 40% of the country, not believing like that Black Lives Matter, then what's this all for?
Yeah, and I mean,
that's a much bigger battle than just turning out on election day, which needs to happen anyway, obviously. But
it's so ingrained in our society right now. That was going to be my response to that is, this isn't going to happen next year. Like in terms of the society being to the point where we can look and say, you know what, now this truly is an equal society for everybody. This might be our grandkids, that might be our grandkids' kids before, but the progress that we're making as a country, the huge steps that we're taking right now, this is continued to be the greatest uprising, the most civil unrest in decades. And I truly believe that as a country, we are making progress. It's going to take generations and generations
look at us now.
This thought process to get to where we need to be. And it starts by having a message, a constant, to me, all politics are local politics. Like all politics are local politics. Every single thing you vote for can affect what happens in your town, in your city, in your county, whatever it is. So, it's just important that we continue to those of if you have a voice, to use it. You can't be non-racist. You have to be anti-racist. That you have to be vocal. Like, we have a show. It's not we joke about every week. We joke about how we're inching towards 10,000 subscribers. We know that our viewing audience isn't that huge.
Wait a second. Inching suggests that we're moving slowly.
Sorry.
Towards 10,000 subscribers.
We're
okay?
rocketing. We're rocketing.
Yeah. Come on.
rocket strapped to 10,000. But the point is like we know that it's important to talk about these things, and there are people with much larger platforms than we have who matter a lot more to a larger audience of people. More and more people are speaking up. More and more people are making it to the point where it's not acceptable to say things like Brian Urlacher tweeted out over the week, or Instagram, whatever it was, on his social media. Like, the Bears have distanced themselves from him. This is the greatest, quite possibly one of the. He is one of the greatest players in the history of that franchise. And the Bears have distanced themselves from him at this point because of things that he said on social media. It is becoming the norm for things like that to be unacceptable. And it has to continue in that same direction, to where if you say it, you get told that's not cool, man. And it doesn't matter if it's at your workplace, if it's on social media, if it's at your family reunion, you know?
Yeah, I'm a Bears fan too. So that was like, oh man, that frustrated me. But honestly, I'm not surprised. No.
Yeah, but you know, it's like you would hope that you would have enough self-awareness in this time to know that even if you have that opinion, to keep your mouth shut. Like, you would think that people like it's just like, well, we get attacked for having an opinion. No, you get attacked for having that opinion. You can have opinions, but you should be told that opinion sucks, man. Like, right. I'm sorry. Like, you should be told that opinion sucks.
Man, I just think about his teammates and like what they think about. I would love to hear from like Lance Briggs, you know, just, and some of those really, I mean, this was some all-time great defenses that they had out there for, you know, like a 3-4 year stretch. Like, I don't know. Maybe they knew. I don't know.
I just don't understand that. Like, as a, you know, he's played football for a really long time. He's been in locker rooms with and around and grew up around a significant number of black men, players, coaches, their families, all of that. How, like, that's the part that just boggles my mind, you know, and that's why we talk about like the NHL thing. Like, you know, Tyler Seguin of the Dallas Stars, he was out at the protest in Dallas after the George Floyd killing, and he kneeled with Ryan Reeves at their first playoff game during the anthem and all these things. But he outright said, he was like, look, I come from like a Toronto suburb. I didn't grow up around any black people. And I was in junior hockey and everything all the way through. And I hardly ever knew any black people till he got to Dallas and like different demographics. And he's like, and I wanted to learn and all those kinds of things. If someone from that kind of situation says something, that's the perfect opportunity to, like, that's a teachable moment. What is Brian Urlacher doing? He doesn't have that excuse, so to say, of like lack of exposure.
Yeah.
I don't get that. Like, that just blows my mind that he could be that dense. But
well, and then you have young athletes, Naomi Osaka, the number 10 ranked player in the world in tennis, and it was in the middle of a tournament, and she was about to play the semifinals, and she was like, "Yeah, I'm not playing anymore. You can do whatever you want, but this is bullshit. Like, I'm not playing a tennis tournament right now." And they were like, "No, we'll put it off for you. It's okay." Like, and she ended up playing. I think she won her semifinal match, which of course then you go out, and after you make that stance, then your next match, all eyes are on you. You know, all this pressure, and she came through because she's a badass tennis player. And but you know, you see the self-awareness of these younger athletes of athletes of any age, that even if you might have a suspicion that some of these guys might or ladies might think this way, they know enough right now not to say anything. So I mean, we need to get to a point where, like I said, that's normalized. The thing that's normalized is to tell people that that's not okay to talk that way about people. It's not okay to have that thought process go through your mind. And yeah, I'm hoping we can get there. We got to keep working hard on it, guys.
For sure. Yeah.
Well, guys, we got a couple minutes left here. Any more thoughts? I know there was a little bit of news today about the Texans. I guess are discussing or leaving the possibility open for striking for their first game against the Kansas City Chiefs here in about 2 weeks. To kind of wrap this thing up, where do we see this going from here? Does the NFL follow suit? And if they do, where does that kind of change things? We know the NFL is massive in this country, so what do you guys think?
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I think week 1 will be postponed.
Across the league, you think so?
I think so, man. Honestly, I really think that that's going to happen. It would. I want it to happen. I think it would be a massive statement, and I think it's going to piss a lot of people off. And when that happens, there's going to be more conversation, and that's going to be great for this whole thing. Like you said, Kerry, good. Yes, like
that would be
people off is
monumental.
It's the thing to do right now, because then they'd say what that's the point. Like, it's like
be uncomfortable. Yes,
exactly. So, Jay, what do you think?
I'm with you. I hope I believe that they'll all be postponed, and I think that's the statement that the NFL needs to make. Period.
Yeah.
Cancel the first week of the season.
Well, we joked about it a little earlier. That means the Texans would get to dodge the opener against the Kansas City Chiefs, which the last time they played the Chiefs, it did not go too well. But we won't get too much into that. But it's
not, man.
No, I think that would be the statement of statements. I feel like, at least in our pro sports here in North America, with just saying, you don't get week 1 of football. It's like Sean Doolittle of the Nationals. I know we've mentioned this quote before, Jay. We've discussed this a lot over the last few months. Sean Doolittle, the Washington Nationals, at least when they were trying to bring everybody back to Major League Baseball during coronavirus, and he said, I don't know if this is really the right thing to do, because sports should be the reward for a functioning society.
Yeah, for sure.
Is anything that's happening right now in this country suggestive that this country is functioning as a society, whether it's COVID, whether it's racial strife, police, killings? Like,
yeah,
cancel it. Let's call it.
It would be the statement of all statements, and the eyes of the sports world and the world in general are on the NFL now, and we'll see what happens.
Well, I think Zoom's about to tell us we got to quit it here, so I think we're going to go ahead and call it here. And everybody tune in for the Longhorn preview show next week. And Mike, it's great having you on. Love your insight and your perspective. And talk to all y'all next week. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Peace.
ATX represent Fatal, baby.